How's it going, guys? It's Paul Myers, licensed professional counselor, owner of Intentional Counseling. Hey, I'm excited you're here. Today, we're going to do an analysis of the new documentary about Selena Gomez called My Mind and Me. So I've had the opportunity to watch this documentary about her, and we just want to look at her case from a clinical perspective. I think if we break down a little further, may end up helping you if you have your own mental health struggles, or somebody that you know. So in the documentary, Selena Gomez discovers that she has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And throughout the documentary, you get to have a backstage view into her mental health struggles and her internal battles that she has with herself. And you kind of see this progression up to the point where she gets hospitalized and gets that diagnosis. So there's a key components in the video that I'm going to kind of break down. One, early on in the documentary, is resistance to taking medication. Her friend is pushing her to take her medication. Hey, you should take it. And she doesn't respond, is unresponsive. And so that's one thing with bipolar. I have seen quite a bit that people really don't, if you have bipolar, they really don't want to take their medication, especially early on when you get that diagnosis. A lot of people are resistant to accept that diagnosis. They're resistant to take their medications, or they don't want to take their medications, especially when they're manic because they're feeling great. And when they're depressed, they don't have the motivation to want to do anything. So that was one interesting point, was the resistance to take medication. That is something that I've definitely seen with bipolar cases, almost early on in any treatment with people that have that diagnosis. Second is in the documentary, early on, she talks about accomplishing everything that she sought out to accomplish, but clearly she's still not happy. So how does somebody become so successful, have such a good fan base, such a following, and so valued, but yet they really have a negative view of themselves, and they're struggling with depression, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But one is bipolar kind of runs its own show. It has its own manual, it has its own cycle, and it really doesn't care about facts or reality or your situation. It's just doing its own thing, and it's running its own course. And so sometimes there's really no reason for a bipolar episode. Sometimes they can just occur. Other times they can be triggered. But that is very common with bipolar. It really, the disorder itself is outside your control. I mean, it's not your fault at all. If you have bipolar, or you know somebody who has it, it's really not their fault. It's totally outside their control. It's just this cycle that they're in, and they vacillate between manic episodes and depressive episodes. If you don't know what a manic episode is, most people know what depression is. Most people are familiar with depression. Not as many people are familiar with mania. You could easily review that. Look at the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for a manic episode. I covered it also in a different YouTube video that I'll link if you want to take a look at a clinical breakdown of bipolar. But I will say that she mentions accomplishing everything and still not being happy. And what I really think is going on is, I think she has an internal identity struggle. Okay. So one thing we know about Selena is she got her first big break working on Barney when she was 7 years old. And that is very young age to go to work and have that much responsibility, right? She mentioned it being fun and being an escape, almost as starting off very innocent and almost being like a way to escape from her life a little bit, and it's fun. But as she continued down her path in her career, I think there's a shift in her identity to start making work a huge, or if not the aspect of her identity. It was massive. Part of her identity is work. And I see this a lot where people make work their sole sense of value, and you associate work with your intrinsic value as a person, and those two things don't go together. Work is external. It's not a reflection of you. A lot of times you can't even control it. It's a good thing. We all need it. It's productive. It's responsible. Nothing wrong with it. But it's just not a good identity. So there's work, which is external, and there's an identity, which healthy identities are intrinsic. They're inside of you. They're not outside of you. So when you make work something external as a part of your identity, I see a ton of mental health struggles. I see anxiety. I see depression. I see more stress and volatility. There's more at stake, because if work doesn't go well, then all of a sudden I'm not valuable anymore, and my sense of worth as a human being is at stake when it's attached to work. Okay. Also, work just can't fulfill those innermost psychological needs that we all have. It just can't do that for you. It's never designed to do that. That's not what it is. So, but it is common for people to do this. And so, if you've made work part of your identity, now's a great opportunity. You can kind of take your eggs out of that basket, still do a great job, still perform well, and be honoring with the work that you're doing, and put the effort in and do well. I'm just saying, don't attach your worth as a person to it. That's the dangerous part. Okay. So one thing that we see across this documentary is Selena really is having this inner turmoil, inner criticism, inner battle with herself. And it's very obvious to me that she's being very self-critical, and she's struggling with her own thought life with a voice in the back of her head of self-criticism. Okay. So let's just take a second and talk about self-criticism. Self-criticism is one of many major thought patterns that is really, really detrimental for mental health. It's more of a way of thinking that is intended to make you better or help you improve or perform at your best. But in all reality, it actually just ends up hindering you and limiting you in your life and making you more prone to depression and anxiety. And so self-criticism is common. It's a really unhealthy way of thinking that can become a really bad habit that can almost perpetuate anxiety and depression. So I definitely see a lot of that that she struggles with. It's very evident in the documentary. She vocalizes her inner critic, these inner voices in her head that tell her everything she's doing wrong all the time and how she's not good enough. And she has to kind of fight that regularly, even when there's unanimous support from everybody around her. And she has her own fan base and her own success, and has accomplished so much, and such a unanimous positive feedback from everybody, yet still just discredits all of that positive and only fixates on the negative. Okay. That's self-criticism. Self-criticism focuses on limitations, focuses on setbacks, it focuses on weaknesses, it focuses on your flaws, it focuses on any failures or mistakes that you've made. It reminds you of those limitations that you have as a person, and it also tends to compare yourself with other people, generally seeing the other person as coming out more favorably than yourself. So it would be a negatively skewed view of self. Like, you're biased, but you're biased negatively towards yourself, which means, you get a positive piece of information and you discredit it. That's not true. That's just them, right? Or, you really wouldn't be saying that if you really knew me, or, okay. But then negative information comes and, oh, yep, that's me. That's correct. That's me. I knew it. I'm awful. I suck. Okay. So this is classic self-criticism that it's so obvious that she has a hard time with this, which is very unfortunate, because as a therapist, it's a really big therapeutic goal of mine to eliminate people's inner critics. A lot of the time we are our own worst enemy. We get in our own way, and all we're doing is limiting ourselves. Okay, but it's all up here. It's all thought life. It's all cognitive thought patterns that we have just picked up from experiences and learned over time, and we've developed these bad habits. This is one of those, and it's very evident, and it plays a huge role into our mental health. Okay, so if Selena was my client, I would be really working with her on challenging those self-critical thoughts that she has, trying to argue with those thoughts using actual evidence, real life evidence, not just wishful thinking, real tangible data that disproves that inner critic and what that inner critic is saying. Okay, and it takes a lot of repetition to challenge inner criticism. It takes a lot of practice and time. So, a good exercise for her would be to journal her negative thoughts, journal her self-criticism, and come up with a counter argument to that inner critic, right? It would also be helpful for her to understand where that self-criticism comes from, because it doesn't just come from nowhere. Generally, it comes from somebody who's criticized you in the past, or maybe you've had some bad experiences in the past, and you're trying to almost beat other people to the punch. If I criticize myself, then I'll be perfect, and other people won't have anything to criticize me for. So a lot of times self-criticism can become learned through the environment or through your experiences or through your childhood or family of origin, or it could be a coping strategy to deal with other people's criticism, or to prevent yourself from being criticized by others. But there's a lot of reasons that it could be there, but it's definitely a reoccurring theme in this documentary with her. So a lot of that self-criticism it comes into play, and there's a lot of irony in her music sometimes, because she does a song where she talks about not wanting to be anybody else, and is really displaying a lot of self-confidence and authenticity. But underneath all of that, there's a lot of self-criticism and insecurity, okay? And so she even admits later on in the documentary, after treatment, and she's improved her mental health, that she just spent so many years faking it and putting on a mask and pretending when really internally there's such a struggle, right? There's something to be said about this, because as human beings, we really don't handle cognitive dissonance very well. Cognitive dissonance is when part of you believes one thing, but then another part of you believes the exact opposite. And so you have this inner pull of two sides to you fighting for what to believe and what to think. And when we have this inner turmoil, it's like a tug of war. Imagine there being a rope, and there's two sides of you, and they're both pulling in both directions. So it's, it really puts a lot of strain on us. And that right there, people hate that. There's so many examples of that I've seen with my clients. And so my heart goes out for her on this inner turmoil she has to deal with. Is very unhealthy for her. And it's very apparent. So part of her wants to be confident, and intellectually may know that she is capable and successful, right? But then the other side of her is just criticizing her and pointing out all the reasons why she's not good enough, okay? And she believes both of them. I will say there's something valuable about speaking positive labels into the world and over yourself, because we tend to fulfill our own prophecy. Here's a good example. If I expect failure, I'm more likely to fail. If I'm a 10-year-old boy and I just think I'm gonna fail the math test on Friday and I'm just not gonna do well, I'm most likely or more likely to fail because I believe that I'm going to fail. And it also works both ways. If I view myself being successful and I envision myself being successful and I visualize that and I speak that into existence, and I almost manifest that success. So we, as human beings, we fulfill our own prophecy a lot of the time. If I think that I'm going to be successful, I'm more likely to make it happen. So I think there's something positive about this concept of speaking this positive label and just putting positive things out into the world and really trying to live into it and manifest it into your life. And it's very positive, right? Versus if I believe I'm going to fail and I really buy into that belief that I am going to fail and all things are going to crash and burn and nothing's going to go well, what's more likely is I'm going to be the thing that makes it fail by avoiding it or not putting in the amount of effort needed or not investing myself fully in it or being apprehensive or just very self-limiting. If you struggle with negative thinking or you know somebody who struggles with negative thinking, to try to change that thought style to say, no, I'm going to make it successful. I'm going to do the best I can to make it better, or at least give it higher probability of success. The other thing, back to that self-criticism, Selena over and over again indicates an inner battle with insecurities. Part of it's she's insecure about the way she looks. She's insecure about her body. I think a lot of women can relate to that just because of all the negative pressure that gets put on women from culture and society. And is very detrimental to them, puts way too much expectation on them. But she's got this insecurity about her appearances, the way she looks, what other people are thinking, whether she's disappointing other people or not, whether she's living up to the expectations of her fans or society or her the person who signed her on or whatever, right? And there's also a tendency to compare. There's some insecurities about her being associated with Justin Bieber and feeling like she's only successful because of him and not really successful for her, and she's only successful because she's associated with him, which is just not true. She has her own talents and her own music and her own product that she's producing in her own fan base. But in her mind, she's really self-critical. She's so convinced of these things. So it just really limits herself, even though a lot of these things are not true. Okay. So let's take one example where she was referring to John, which is the person that signed her on to do her shows. And she's referring to not wanting to disappoint John. She was really fearful that she was disappointing him and did a bad job and was apologizing profusely. It was unnecessary. And John walks in and he's like, what are you talking about? Like, you did amazing. He's like, that was incredible. Like, just stop beating yourself up, And so what I wanted to do, I wanted to speak on expectations of self. Okay. I've seen thousands of patients in my counseling practice where the more expectations they have of themselves, the worse their mental health. And here's why. If on a chart, I had a scale from no expectations to perfect expectations, okay? And I'm somewhere in the middle here. That means half of everything I'm unhappy with and half of everything I'm happy with if I'm in the middle, right? But as my expectations go up, the more and more the percentage of things increase of the things that I'm just not happy with. And so as expectations go up, happiness is going down. You're just not happy. There's more and more and more and more things you're disappointed that are just subpar to you. When in all actuality, they may be perfectly fine, but to you, they're not good enough because your expectation was high. So that is something to be aware of, that if you have really high expectations of yourself, that's actually healthy for you to lower those expectations of yourself. Now, before you immediately kick back and say, whoa, are you saying I should just have no standards and whatever and not care? And no, I'm not saying that at all. Actually, having standards for yourself is totally fine, right? It's okay to have personal convictions. I'm just saying the expectation part is the unhealthy part, okay? And what I've noticed is the amount of effort you put into something is actually the thing that makes you successful. The expectation, however, that just determines how happy you are about it and not. And so, for example, if I put in a lot of expectation and I put in a lot of effort, I'm probably going to get a good result because I put a lot of effort in, but then it's expected. So, yeah, whatever. That was expected. Okay. So I'm not really experiencing any positive feelings about my own accomplishments. It's almost like, here's my expectation, and then I put a lot of effort in, put effort in, put an effort in, put effort in, put effort in, and then the whole way I'm just criticizing myself, and then I finally reach the expectation, and it's like, okay, well, that was expected. So it's either a negative experience or neutral at best, which is really heartbreaking because, to put in that much effort is amazing. I mean, you should feel great about that. Like, it takes a lot of self-discipline. It takes tenacity. It takes perseverance. It shows a lot of strength and maturity. That's amazing. And to consistently put in effort is always a good thing. I always encourage people to put the effort in. Your life just goes better when you try harder and you make your life what you want it to look like. But if it's always just expected all the time, you won't experience any joy. So I see that a lot here in Selena's case and so many people's cases that I see. They just expect so much from themselves. And what I want people to do is I want people to lower that expectation of themselves, but continue to keep the same amount of effort that they would normally put in. Okay. Effort is actually what makes it successful. The expectation, that just either ruins your attitude or makes you really happy with what you're doing. One of the two. It's just a vantage point, really. So put in the effort. Increasing the amount of effort always increases the probability of success, but decreasing the expectation will make you a lot happier about it, and you'll probably handle it better, and it may even improve your performance because you're not in your own way. Another thing I wanted to touch on is intrusive thoughts. In the documentary, Selena discloses that she's got this voice in the back of her head, all these negative, intrusive thoughts that come in that she has to deal with, okay? And I just wanted to take a second to talk about intrusive thoughts. As a therapist, I really, really, really want to reinforce to all people that intrusive thoughts are not a reflection of you, okay? Let's just get that clear. We all have thoughts. Everybody's got thoughts. I have thoughts. You have thoughts. Even people who have the healthiest mental health out there have thoughts that are intrusive, that are just automatic, that just pop in. And those are called automatic thoughts or intrusive thoughts. Everybody has those. That's normal, okay? Some more than others, okay? So one thing to note is intrusive thoughts. I see so many of my clients judge themselves off of it. They criticize themselves off of their own thoughts. They have this ridiculous intrusive thought, and then they're rational enough to identify that it's a ridiculous thought, but then they beat themselves up for having that thought as if they're crazy, and then they doubt themselves, and it's just this whole spiral. And man, that just breaks my heart for them, because it's okay to have a thought, I've had clients say, things like, oh, I've had, intrusive thoughts of being violent, or intrusive thoughts of harming myself, okay? And these really intense negative thoughts, which are very alarming for most people, of course, right? However, that is not characteristic of them at all. It's really out of left field. And even they're kind of weirded out by it, and they're kind of thrown off and confused. And the fact that they're able to tell me, this is crazy thought, I don't even know where this came from. I don't think like this. I would never do that. You know what I mean? The fact that they're even questioning it and identifying it as irrational is a good thing. Okay, that means you're a rational person. That means you're aware. You're very rational. Okay, so don't view intrusive thoughts as a reflection of you. Okay, otherwise you end up self-critical and struggling like Selena. All this inner hatred and internalization of everything. When really intrusive thoughts are common, you can, even if they're as negative as the ones I just shared, that's okay. We just want to challenge those. Hey, that's just a thought. Like, obviously I'm not doing that, like I'm rational enough to be able to dismiss that. I would never do that. And that's not a reflection of me at all. That's just a negative thought. So I've even had some of my clients, this is an exercise I've assigned to my clients, where they take intrusive negative thoughts and they write them down on a sticky note or a piece of paper, and then just crumple that thing up and toss it in the trash can. And it's a way to basically take charge of your own thoughts. And it's also a way to just dismiss negative thoughts in a very tangible sense. It's very empowering. And I find with enough repetition, enough practice, one, it's just easier to dismiss negative thoughts when you read it on paper and you're like, yeah, that's not good. This is garbage. Okay. It sounded really good up here, but then when I read it out loud to myself, it's actually really awful. And you're able to toss it out easier. You're also able to externalize that negative thought. So it's not just up here. You're getting it out. And you're able to dismiss it easier in a very tangible sense because you're kind of taking charge and there's more of an active role and tangibly throwing the piece of paper away. It feels really good, right? So that's a great exercise. If you struggle with intrusive thoughts or self-criticism, or like Selena, or really any kind of automatic thought that's very negative, that's popping in a lot, you can use that to dismiss those thoughts and challenge those thoughts. The other thing you can do is journal. Journal your arguments against those negative thoughts. And you'll find that you're a lot more rational than you think you are. You're able to dismiss all of that, okay? So hopefully that'll help. Another thing I wanted to touch on was comparison games, because it's very obvious to me that Selena is comparing herself to either Justin Bieber or other people or other artists or whatever, right? And so there's all this comparison. And I just want to speak on comparison games because anytime two people compare themselves to one another, it's a really unfair parallel, okay? What I know about research and good science is that the more we can isolate variables, the more we can attribute differences and results to the study to that isolated variables, okay? So for example, if there's 5 variables and, these 4 variables are exactly the same as these 4 variables, and we've got two different groups here, but that one variable is different but the other 4 are the same, okay, then that means whatever the results of the study that come out, I can now attribute or correlate more with the isolated variable, the one variable that was different than the others, right? That's good science, okay? And then obviously the more volume and the more data and the more repetition, the bigger your sample pool, and the better, because you're reinforcing it. You're not just taking 2 people and okay, well that's my research study, okay? But that's good science, is to isolate variables, okay? So when I take 2 people that each have thousands of variables, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of variables, we're complicated, and none of them are the same. You don't know what is doing what. I mean, there's just no possible way to attribute and count for any of that. They're all just playing off each other. It's a mess. You're better off, just being blindfolded and playing a game of darts. You don't even know what's happening right now. It's just a total luck of the draw here. Okay, so that's really bad science. So when you compare 2 people to 2 people, it's an unfair parallel, and the results are just not true. They're just not accurate. It's like comparing a bucket of apples to a boat. I mean, there's just like no correlation at all. Okay, so hopefully that'll help you. If you struggle with comparison games, a lot of people do. It's okay. Don't beat yourself up at all. But I just wanted to free you from that tendency to compare yourself to other people. It's unhealthy and not necessary, and you're getting inaccurate conclusions from that anyways, okay? So free yourself of doing that. Everyone's unique. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and everyone is intrinsically valuable. And so if you can view it this way, you can celebrate the strengths in others and their success without comparing yourself to that, because you have your own set of strengths that's totally different, and your own set of variables. If you had all of their set of variables, then you would be them. But you're not. You're not them. In fact, they're the only them that there is, and you're the only you that there is. So just allow space for everybody to be unique, and I think it'll help you challenge that self-critic or that comparative critic inside of you. If you have that tendency, or if you know somebody that has that tendency, hopefully that helps with that one, with the ability to change that way of thinking, be more healthy. All right, now in the documentary, Selena has just a mental breakdown episode, and you can call it a panic attack or anxiety attack, or a psychotic breakthrough, or just a bipolar episode. Regardless of what it is, it's a mental health disorder based on all this pressure and expectation that she had to deal with, from being on stage and traveling and her fan base, and just all the pressure that comes with being a celebrity and a public figure. And in addition to all the internal pressure that she put on herself to try to do a good job with great intentions. Her intentions are fantastic, right? I've got to give it to her. But the expectation is just too much. It's too hard to live up to. So all this pressure just culminates. She also had medical struggles with lupus, and she had to get a kidney transplant, and she just kind of went through the ringer, honestly. So I don't know anybody who would handle any of that very well either. So, but all of this stuff kind of culminates into the point where, she ended up getting hospitalized. Now they gave her a diagnosis of bipolar. So in the documentary, you can see her inner struggle with this diagnosis. And when she first receives this diagnosis, she's kind of trying to wrap her brain around this diagnosis. And she's doing what most people do, that they make this classic mistake where they take a mental health disorder and they personalize it. And they start viewing that as just, this is just who I am now. I'm just broken now. And they take a disorder and they almost label themselves. That's like an identity. It's like you have one of those stamps, and they just like stamp their forehead, like, oh, yep, I'm bipolar. That's me now. It's just who I am. Okay. Man, I really have spent a lot of time with thousands of clients trying to undo this. Just undo this idea that I am my disorder. It's like, no. It's a disorder. Okay. It's not who you are. So I really wanted to speak into that, because if you have mental health struggle, that is not who you are. That is not your identity. It's just a struggle that you have. Everybody has a struggle. Welcome to the party. Okay. That's just being a human being, basically. And later in the documentary, she even mentions that. She's like, I've learned that it's just being human, right? Having struggles is just being human. It's okay, right? What a great perspective. Absolutely. You nailed it. But it took her a lot of work to get there. And that's something I've really tried to enforce with people. If you have a mental health diagnosis, that is not who you are. That's just a disorder. Okay. Like if I get a sinus infection, I don't internalize and personalize the sinus infection diagnosis. I don't go to the doctor and get diagnosed sinus infection, get an antibiotic, and then walk out of there being like, well, this is just who I am. I'm just sinus infection. That's what I am now. Like, this is just me now. Like, I don't do that. Okay. It's just it's a disease. It's a sickness. It's a disorder, right? It's just something I have to deal with right now. And that's okay, right? That's okay. Even disorders that are permanent, even disorders that are non-curative, okay? That's okay. It's not who you are. It's just a thorn in your side that you have to deal with. Everybody has one, okay? So there's a lot of positive value in giving yourself grace to have a struggle and to not personalize that struggle and take that on as a part of your identity and take that hit to your self-esteem and your sense of self-value and self-worth, okay? Like I said earlier, you're already intrinsically valuable because you're a human being. All people matter and have value and are capable of doing a lot of good, right? But when you internalize your disorder, all you're doing is really limiting yourself, and you're skewing your own view of yourself to be more negative, and it's unnecessary. Now, in the documentary, Selena shows a clip of herself as a child, and she's very vulnerable, sharing her childhood fears of thunderstorms or rain, lightning, tornado, or whatever, at the time that she was having anxiety about as a child. Okay. And her mother reassured her and encouraged her to learn more about thunderstorms and study thunderstorms and gain the knowledge about that. And this is really powerful because she used that same mindset of the more you know about something, the less afraid of it you are, right? From a clinical standpoint, you get more desensitized to it. Desensitization means you're just growing more accustomed to it, so it just doesn't have the same effect on you anymore. It's kind of like a watering down effect. Like if I watch, here's a good example of desensitization. In the 1950s, horror films used to be black and white, like The Blob, right? For example. And it was like, oh, so scary, The Blob, and now it's like a comedy, because as from the 1950s, the horror films were so scary to them at the time. But over the course of time, the horror films have to get more horrific and more awful and more negative and more evil and more scary for people to have that same feeling, okay? That's desensitization, okay? Now, the example I gave you is probably not a good thing. It's like a negative desensitization. But you can use desensitization positively to desensitize yourself to your fears, okay? She was very afraid to get that bipolar diagnosis, as most people would be. It's definitely not good news. So it's very scary at first if you don't know what bipolar is. But the more you learn about it and the more you research and the more you study and the more you educate yourself, and you really want to go with the healthcare practitioners on this one, you don't want to just Google it, okay? But the more you learn, the better you're going to be. And the more informed you are, the more power you're going to have over it, the less power it's going to have over you, and the more you can treat it accurately in a healthy way. And you can even begin to anticipate the disorder and be proactive and preventative, okay? Desensitization is so effective for treating anxiety or phobias, and really, or just in general, using it strategically to challenge yourself so that you grow and your comfort zone expands and you get more and more resilient and you make progress. So like I said earlier, the identity crisis that is going on with Selena during her documentary, I think is a theme start to finish here. She goes back to her childhood roots and goes to her childhood memories and goes to her old school and goes to old homes that she lived in and played in, and she's getting in touch with her childhood self. I think there's a lot of value in that for her in her case. Now, if you've had a really awful childhood with abuse, neglect, trauma, I'm so sorry. Going back to your childhood was probably going to be very triggering for you more than as a positive thing. And so that if you were my client, I would probably have a different approach for you. But for Selena, in her case, her childhood was good memories for her. So she's just trying to get back to who she is and her roots, because she started working at age 7. So you basically lose a lot of your childhood in her case, because once she started, she never stopped. She just kept going. You know what I mean? Moved to California and had a whole acting career, and is an artist, a creative, and just snowballed that and really lost herself in it. The work became who she was. It became her identity. So, and she was faking it and being inauthentic and really struggling internally because she wasn't allowed to. She felt like she couldn't be herself, right? So she got back to her childhood roots. There's a lot of healing in that. I think there's a lot of value for her. She was able to kind of reset some of her view of herself and get back in touch, right? And it helped her be more authentic going forward. And as you notice, there's a huge shift from when she was hospitalized to after she got her treatment. I think it was a 2-year time span there, where from the time she went on she had 55 shows and, got hospitalized. Then 2 years later, she finally got back in the game, right? So that 2 year window, she was able to do a lot of work on herself. What we've seen is a huge shift in her level of vulnerability, her level of comfort with being authentic and open, and using her story in a very sincere, authentic way for good, which I think is awesome. Such a silver lining. And I love that, because we can take negative and use it for good a lot of the time. In fact, I've seen most therapists do this, even like they take their negative in their life and they use that as motivation to really want to help others and have empathy and compassion for others, and have some insight into how to overcome those struggles, which I think is very valuable. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you have your own mental health struggles, don't hesitate to comment below. The more vulnerable you are, it really encourages others to be vulnerable. And you never know that your story could help someone else, okay? Please comment below if you have questions or personal struggles. Would love to hear from you. And feel free to view some of my other videos where I talk about just a variety of mental health struggles, from bipolar to anxiety to depression to relationship struggles, to ADHD. There's just a lot. And stay tuned for more, because we will post regularly. And if you haven't done therapy, go to intentional-counseling.com. Either myself or a trained therapist at our practice would be more than happy to help you, either in person if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, or via telehealth. All right, guys, we appreciate you. Take care.